17th century, European powers created East India Companies. These powerful companies were to dominate the highly profitable trade of silk, spices, tea, and other valuable imports.
It's the promise of exotic goods and good old-fashioned profit that drove Europe to the East Indies in the late 17th century. Now players can try their hand at steering a trade empire toward untold riches with East India Company. East India Company is a business sim with a touch of tactical strategy thrown in for good measure. As the head of a prominent European trading company, you send your merchant fleets to Africa and India in search of valuable goods to bring back to the motherland. Every other major player in Europe is trying to get a piece of the action as well, and it's only a matter of time before things go from gentlemanly to downright nasty. But hey, it's just business.
We shall send them to Kingdom Come.
You begin by choosing one of 8 European nations. From there, you take to your seed capital, build some ships, assign them to a fleet, and sail off to the East Indies in search of lucrative opportunities for trade. Depending on where you end up, you'll be purchasing and hauling things like silk, spices, tea, pottery, diamonds, and gold back to your home port.
That is an excellent place to anchor our fleet.
Taking over foreign ports by force is often the best way to ensure open trade routes. It's also a good way to put the hurt on your European rivals. After all, if you control all of the ports that produce tea, you can corner the market. Of course, that's also a good way to make enemies. Pirates and rival companies are always lurking in the waters, ready to take down an ill-defended fleet. Here's where the tactical strategy part of East India Company comes into play. Once battle commences, the game zooms in on the action. You can control your fleet like a real-time strategy game, or you can take the wheel and do everything yourself. As the game wears on, you'll be able to build, sail, and fight with 11 different types of ships, from the weak, speedy sloop, all the way up to the massive 90 gunship of the line. In the game's grand campaign, your company gives you a series of milestones that you need to meet within a given time period. Meet those demands and you get to keep your job for another few years. Fail, and it's off to the unemployment line. Other campaigns focuses more on achieving profit or conquering some or all of India. There's also an online multiplayer mode that focuses strictly on naval battles. For a game that deals in the intricacies of trade, East India Company is surprisingly hands-off. A few in-game tutorials tell you everything you need to know to play. Setting up trade routes between Europe and the East Indies is as simple as selecting your fleet, pushing the automatic trade route button, and choosing your foreign port. Your ships then dutifully sail to their destination, stopping at friendly ports to resupply along the way. Once there, the cargo holds get filled with any major trade items you can afford, and the remainder of the space is filled in with general trade goods. Then it's back to the home port, where the cycle begins again. You can do all of this manually as well, giving players more control over exactly what they're buying and selling. But the interface isn't quite up to the task. Nearly every important detail or function in the game is buried several clicks deep and takes place on huge windows that fill the screen. After a few times of doing all of this manually, you'll be quite happy to automate most of your fleets while wishing there was some kind of way to tell them only to buy certain items or set other kinds of limitations. As it stands now, trade in East India Company is an all-or-nothing endeavor. There's a fair bit of nuance to the economy in the game. Prices do fluctuate, so it's entirely possible to buy up a low-value item, store it in your warehouse, and wait several years for the value to skyrocket before selling. But again, much of this information is buried in menus and not on screen. Interplay between the competing nations also gets more complex once most of the foreign ports get snapped up. Diplomacy becomes necessary in order to keep trade routes open. Relations can also go south awfully fast, leading to open warfare, a prospect that can be devastating to your bottom line. As for the battles themselves, they're a competent diversion from the main game, playing much like the naval battles in Empire Total War. The capabilities of different ships are made very apparent during combat, as is the importance of speed and direction of the wind. Fleet captains also play an important role in how well a fleet performs in and out of battle. In a nod to role-playing games, fleet captains can level up and gain special abilities that affect combat, morale, and even the amount of cargo each ship can carry. Business sims aren't necessarily known for their slick presentation, but East India Company certainly bucks that trend. The 3D map of Europe, Africa, and the East Indies is gorgeous, as are the depictions of naval warfare. However, with all of this spit and polish, a lot of the important bits of information, which could have been showcased right on the main screen, have been relegated to menus. It's also odd that the mini-map used to track your ships and trade routes, among other things, is so tiny that it's nearly useless. While certainly playable, East India Company often feels like an example of form over function.
Ship ready, sir. Awaiting commands, sir.
The audio is adequate. Aside from the occasional verbal confirmation of your commands, there's not much going on here. The music is pleasant and appropriate for the time period. A game based on the exploits of Europe and the East Indies might appear to be an overly complex subject for many gamers, but East India Company is not nearly as tough to figure out as you might think. It's a reasonably approachable trading sim, with some pretty naval battles tossed in for good measure. The most demanding sim aficionados might not find enough to hold their interest for the long haul, but East India Company is definitely worth checking out if you're new to the genre, or merely have an itch to make lots of virtual cash.